When it comes to diabetes and Mexican food, there is so much confusion out there. I talk to clients every week who tell me that they've been told to cut out tortillas, skip rice, or ditch their favorite fruits, all because of their diabetes diagnosis. As a Latina dietitian, I get why it feels overwhelming. You want to take care of your health, but you're also being told to give up your culture. And honestly, that's not okay. Here's what I want you to know. The problem is not Mexican food, but rather it's how the nutrition world talks about Mexican food. So today, I'm setting the record straight. We're going to be talking about 6 things you need to know about Mexican food and diabetes. But before we dive in, who am I and why am I talking to you about this? I'm Krista. Hello. I'm a registered dietitian and proud Latina. My parents are from Mexico and Cuba. So I grew up eating Latin American food, and that's the food that I'm the most comfortable with and the most comfortable talking about. When I was trying to learn more about nutrition to navigate some health issues that I was having, I felt like I kept getting recommended just food that sounded sad to me or didn't sound good or even kind of flavorless. And then the foods that I knew and that I loved were nowhere to be found in any of these recommendations. So I went back to school. I changed careers. I'm a dietitian now. I learned everything I could about nutrition, specifically nutrition with Latin American food. So now I'm here helping other Latinos or even just people who love Latin American food learn that this food culture is actually so good for us. And I really want to highlight all the ways that Latin American food serves us and our health goals. So it's not something to make healthier. I want to talk about how it is healthy. So now that we've got that out of the way, we're buddies now. Let's talk about the 6 things you need to know about Mexican food and diabetes. Point number 1. Mexican food did not give you diabetes. Let's start there because I hear this one all the time. People will tell me, oh, it must have been all those tortillas, or you know how it is. We eat rice every day. That's why we get diabetes. And they're talking about the fact that the Latino population tends to be at a higher risk for diabetes. But let me tell you, that's not how it works. Diabetes is complex. According to the Cleveland Clinic, some common factors include genetics, physical activity levels, long-term medication use, certain hormone conditions, and even chronic stress. So yes, diet plays a role, but it's not the only factor. And in most cases, people don't develop diabetes just because of just one thing. Usually it's a mix of several different risk factors. And here's something that I wish people talked about more is that genetics do matter. If you have a sibling with type 2 diabetes, your risk doubles. And here's the part that I really think people don't talk about enough, specifically with Mexican food, is that Mexican food might actually help prevent diabetes. Yes, prevent. There's growing research showing that traditional Mexican diets, I'm talking, a diet based in corn, beans, squash, vegetables like tomatoes and nopales, fruits, that type of diet may be protective against diabetes. One study from 2022 found that people who followed a traditional Mexican diet had lower insulin levels. That means their bodies were responding better to blood sugar. Another study found improved insulin sensitivity, which is exactly what we want for diabetes prevention. So no, Mexican food did not give you diabetes. In fact, it might just be part of your toolkit and part of the solution. Point number 2, you can still eat tortillas, rice, and really all carbs. Carbs are not the enemy, really. Diabetes is about how your body responds to carbs. It doesn't mean that you need to completely avoid them. In fact, a diabetes-friendly diet often includes 30 to 45 grams of carbs per meal. So that could look like 2 or 3 corn tortillas at a meal, a larger flour tortilla. It could be 3/4 cup of rice. Now, I get it. I know most of us are eating more than 1 carb at a time. I know I do. Rice and beans, they go together, of course, right? So that's where we want to talk a little bit about portion and balance. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later on in the video. But this doesn't mean that we're avoiding these foods. It means that we are combining them together in our plate. We're being mindful of portions. But that doesn't mean that we're getting our portions as teeny tiny as possible. It means that we know what an appropriate portion is for us, and we are trying to stick to that and round out our plate with other foods like fiber and protein. And adding that fiber and protein in helps slow down our digestion. It makes us feel full for longer. It helps keep our blood sugar more balanced. So we're not just talking about the impacts of tortillas on our blood sugar. We're talking about the impacts when we have tortillas with beans, avocado, chicken, and vegetables all together on a plate. What does that do for our blood sugar? And that's when we can have the conversation about the impacts of Mexican food on blood sugar. And that's why I say it might be better than you think. Speaking of tortillas, quick aside, did you know that the process of taking corn and turning it into masa to make tortillas, we call that process nixtamalization, it increases resistant starch, and that's a type of fiber that is actually really great for your blood sugar. Oh, corn tortillas for the win. I actually made a whole video about that. I'm going to link it right here so you can learn more about corn tortillas in particular for our blood sugar. And if you don't like brown rice, that's a really common tip people get, is to eat brown rice. Well, if you don't like it, no sweat. You don't have to eat brown rice. We're talking about the combo of rice and beans. Adding beans to your white rice, if that's what you like, that combo helps lower your blood sugar response. So your body can handle white rice and beans better than it can handle just white rice on its own. That's why the way that we build our entire plate matters so much. Point number 3, all fruit is a healthy choice. I get so frustrated on my clients' behalf when they tell me, my doctor told me to stop eating mango or pineapple, and that they told them that they had to only eat fruits that are low sugar, like blueberries and specifically green apples. If you like green apples and blueberries, if that's what you want to eat, they're great. I love those foods too, but that doesn't mean that you have to stop giving up your favorite fruits. If your favorite fruits are mango and papaya, you don't have to stop eating them. Yes, these tropical fruits have natural sugar, but they also have fiber. They have so many vitamins, they have antioxidants. All of those things are good for our overall health, and they help support blood sugar control. And when you eat fruit in a good portion size as part of a larger meal or snack, like a half of a small mango or a cup of papaya, you're totally fine. That totally fits into a diabetes-friendly diet. In fact, the glycemic index is a measure of how much a food raises your blood sugar, and it goes from 1 to 100. And mango has a glycemic index of just 51. That is officially considered to be low glycemic. So go ahead and enjoy your fruit. Throw some chamoy or tajin on there if you want. Of course, I always recommend eating carbs like fruit as part of a larger meal or as part of a snack that also has protein. So I might ask you to eat fruit with yogurt or fruit with nuts, but you don't have to switch to exclusively eating green apples or blueberries unless you want to. You can have the favorite fruit that you love. Okay, and really quick disclaimer before we get on to the next 3 points. I have to say this, I am a dietitian, but I'm not your dietitian. I can't give medical advice to individual people on here. I don't have access to your medical history. There's so much individualization that goes into this. So this is all general nutrition information. It is not specific medical advice for you. Your needs may be different based on medications, activity level, the rest of your medical history, what you're seeing with your blood sugar trends over time. So always talk to your own healthcare team before making changes. Talk to your doctor, talk to your dietitian who knows your history and your background before making any changes. Point number 4 might be my favorite. Beans can help manage diabetes. Beans are seriously one of my favorite foods to talk about. And Mexican food, Latin American food in general, for the most part, gets beans. Here's the deal. Beans have carbs, but they also have fiber and protein. They're this magical kind of all-in-one food. So that fiber and that protein help slow down how quickly our blood sugar increases. Research shows that regular bean consumption can improve insulin sensitivity and lower cholesterol. Both of those things are important for diabetes, right? Insulin sensitivity is important for preventing diabetes or managing diabetes once you're diagnosed. And then, as we know, diabetes can increase your risk for heart disease. So managing your cholesterol when you have diabetes is super important. And like we were talking about earlier, beans can kind of help manage how you respond to the other foods on your plate. Pairing beans with rice improves your blood sugar response to the rice. So sometimes my clients have heard that since beans and rice both have carbs, they need to pick one or the other. But I want to say that adding beans to your rice, like we do in Latin American food, right? So often we eat beans and rice together, right? They're kind of like peanut butter and jelly in the US, right? They go together. And that actually has specific nutrition benefits above and beyond just the rice. Of course, we don't want to ignore portion sizes. Here's how I like to think about portion sizes with beans. So if you're eating a vegetarian meal, beans are like the main protein on your plate. You can get about half a cup of beans as your protein source. That may not be enough for all of your protein in the meal, but you might want to add one other thing too, like some cheese or like some pumpkin seeds or an egg, something like that. And so that combo together will get you enough protein for a meal for the most part. But a serving size of the beans would be starting at a half cup if that's your main protein in the meal. You can have more, but a lot of people find that once they go beyond a half cup of beans, they start to feel stomach discomfort. So that's why we're saying about a half cup. But if you can handle more, no problem there. If you're also eating an animal protein at your meal, like this is so common I'm going to go on a tangent, but in the US, a lot of times beans are treated like the vegetarian option. And so if you're eating beans, you're not eating meat a lot of the time in the United States. In Mexican food and in a lot of Latin American food, beans are just always an option. Like they're just always served at the table, regardless of what else is going on. So, you might have another protein like eggs if it's breakfast or chicken at dinner, and you're still going to have beans offered to you at the table, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the case where you already have like an animal protein on your plate, then you can still have about a half cup of beans, but that can be your carb source, and then you're just getting a little extra protein boost from it. But if you are like most Mexican Americans and most Latinos, you may be eating rice and beans together, or in the case of Mexican American food, it could go either way between rice and beans or tortillas and beans. Either way, that combo of the other carbs, so the rice or the tortillas, plus beans, you just want to think about that basically as one dish, and you want to count the serving size of that one dish. So the rice and beans together, you want to go for about 2/3 of a cup or 3/4 of a cup and count that as your total carb portion. And you can count that as like a nice, healthy, complex carb that has fiber in it. Point number 5 is that some Mexican foods actually support blood sugar. So remember when we were talking about how a traditional Mexican diet can actually be good for diabetes prevention and good for insulin resistance? Well, sometimes that's just about the balance of foods, but also there are some specific traditional Mexican ingredients that are superstars for blood sugar management. So here are just a few, just a small selection. The first are nopales, those cactus paddles. Some studies show that eating nopales can lower blood sugar after meals. You know that sticky gel inside the nopales? It's pectin, which is a soluble fiber that helps slow down digestion and can be good for managing blood sugar. The other one is the iconic avocado. It's high in fiber, high in healthy fat. One study even found that Latinos who eat avocado regularly are less likely to develop type 2 diabetes. So we see that blood sugar management action of the avocado happening there. And the other one I think is less known in the United States, but it is a very traditional Mexican food. It's chaya. Sometimes you may hear it called tree spinach. It's a leafy green. It's traditionally used in southern Mexican food. And early research shows it may help lower triglycerides and inflammation. And some studies have looked at adding it to tamaldo, which does happen in some regions of Mexican food. The way that they'll make their tamales, they'll have chaya mixed into the dough. And that actually lowered the glycemic index of the masa harina. So that made the amount that masa harina increases your blood sugar lower than masa without the chaya. But honestly, those are just 3. I could keep going. We have chia seeds, we have corn tortillas. I have an entire video on that one I already referenced. Chiles, beans. We talked about those a little bit. The list goes on and on and on. These foods are part of our cultural heritage, and science is starting to realize now why they're so important to us, how they've kept our community going for so many years. Science is just starting to catch up with what our culture has been telling us for a long time. Sixth and final point is that you can absolutely make Mexican food work with the diabetes plate method. If you've heard of the diabetes plate method, it's very popular. A lot of people have heard of it. I'll post a graphic right here. You've probably seen this before. It's one of the most popular ways of managing diabetes. It's kind of getting at some of the things we've talked about already, which is the idea that different food groups on the plate can kind of balance each other out. And you want to be thinking about not just portions, but what different foods are on the plate and how they're interacting together. So the plate method for diabetes is the idea that you want to have half of your plate have non-starchy vegetables, your quarter of your plate have protein, and then a quarter of your plate have carbs. And Mexican food totally fits into this model. If this model makes sense for your brain, Mexican food totally fits. Here are some of my favorite Mexican foods for each of those different sections of the plate. So for this non-starchy vegetable section where we want to get half of the plate, just some ideas. You could do cabbage, you could do nopales, calabacitas, tomato, onion, chayote, radish, cucumber, avocado. Yes, we do consider avocado a vegetable for the purpose of this plate. Totally counts. For the protein section, we have pretty much any meat like chicken, fish, meat, that totally works. Also eggs. And again, those beans that we talked about, cheese, milk, yogurt, nuts, any of those work. For the carbs, we have my absolute fave, corn tortillas. Rice and beans can go in the carb section. Also starchy vegetables like potato, yuca, plátano, kind of depending on what region of Mexican food you're eating. And my favorite pro tip for using the plate method for Mexican food, especially with the vegetable section, is to utilize garnishes, right? 2 tablespoons each. Let's say you do garnishes of avocado slices, salsa, some diced onion, and radish slices. If you did 2 tablespoons of each of those, which I think is reasonable if you're eating like a tostada or a couple tostadas or like a bowl of pozole, if you did 2 tablespoons of each of those, you would have a half-cup serving of vegetables, which is what we consider to be a serving of vegetables in the world of nutrition and dietetics. So those little garnishes, they really add up quickly if you're doing more than one. Managing diabetes is hard enough. Feeling like you have to give up your favorite cultural foods, the foods that you love, that you grew up with, that your parents made for you, that makes it so much harder. It can make it feel impossible, which is why I want you to know you don't have to choose between your favorite foods, your culture, and your health. It's not just that Mexican food can work with diabetes. I would argue that Mexican food can actually support your health when you have diabetes, especially when you're focusing on fiber-rich traditional ingredients like beans, like corn, like squash, nopales. If you're looking for more support or ideas to help you manage diabetes while enjoying our beautiful cultural food that we have, I've got 2 resources that can help you. The first is a free 1-week meal plan. It's not specifically for diabetes, it's for everyone, but I can tell you it's generally healthy enough that it's a really good starting point to see what balanced meals look like that include really common Mexican foods. So that's a good way to just kind of get the ideas flowing. You can sign up for that. You can get your free copy by entering your email. I'll have the link in the description. Then the second is specific to diabetes. It is a Spanish language recipe book with diabetes friendly recipes. I love this one for a lot of my audience is actually trying to get information for their parents or their grandparents who are Spanish speakers. And so if that's something that you relate to, this recipe book is a really good starting point. They're pretty traditional recipes. We didn't do anything super new or different. So they're familiar enough recipes, but we just kind of made sure that we approached the portion sizes and the cooking in a way that we kept the amount of carbs per serving in line with that standard recommendation we were talking about. So that is available for purchase at the link in the description. And then, of course, I'm going to keep posting these free videos and blog posts so that you can keep learning with me. That's all for today. Thanks, everyone.